Good evening. And welcome to Georgetown University. Welcome to Conversations in Bioethics. I am Reena Agarwal, Vice Provost for Faculty and the Robert McDonough Professor of Finance in the McDonough School of Business. This is the 4th annual Conversations in Bioethics event, a campus-wide experience hosted by the Kennedy Institute of Ethics at Georgetown University. Conversations in Bioethics brings members of our community and the public together with students who have engaged in coursework on a difficult and important issue in bioethics. Together, with the help and insights of experts in the area, we are involved and we are invited into a difficult and transformative conversation. The Kennedy Institute of Ethics at Georgetown helped to actually found the field of bioethics more than 40 years ago and has been supporting work in applied ethics to make the world a better place ever since. This work is central to our mission at Georgetown. In the past 3 years, the KIE has hosted conversations on medical error, conversations on personal genomics, and what makes a family. We owe special thanks to Fran Buckley, a member of Georgetown's Board of Regents, and the Kennedy Institute of Ethics Regents Committee, whose generosity makes these conversations possible. Fran, thank you very much. And tonight, for the first time, Conversations in Bioethics will be live streamed. Tonight, we ask the question, what is disability? We expect this conversation is going to challenge many of our assumptions and invite us all to think about ourselves and our world differently. I hope that you were able to enjoy the gallery of student work. Thanks to the faculty and students who contributed to that work. I particularly want to thank Megan Dean and the faculty of the Disability Students Studies Initiative, especially Rebecca Kulka, Sylvia Anders, and Libby Rifkin. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce one of the most dynamic people here at Georgetown, Maggie Little, Director of the KIE. Maggie will introduce tonight's panel and moderate the discussion. Dr. Little is Director of the Kennedy Institute of Ethics and Professor of Philosophy here at Georgetown. Her research interests include issues in reproduction, clinical research ethics, and the structure of moral theory. A Rhodes Scholar and Fellow of the Hastings Center, Dr. Little has twice served as visiting scholar in residence at the National Institutes of Health Department of Bioethics. And she was appointed to the Ethics Committee of the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology. As director of KIE at Georgetown, Dr. Little has overseen the development of a variety of educational initiatives, including the launch of the world's first Introduction to Bioethics MOOC in 2014, and the development of this important series. Please join me in welcoming Maggie Little.
Thank you so much, Reena, for that gracious introduction, and may I welcome all of you to this year's Conversations in Bioethics. We have students here. We have Georgetown faculty here. We have faculty and students from Gallaudet. We have alumna of Georgetown, Georgetown leaders in the audience. We're live streaming. I know for a fact we've got some special friends in San Francisco, in the South, and in the Midwest. Hi, Jean, my mother-in-law. I am so excited to introduce this year's panel. I'm going to get right to it because we have 6 extraordinary people who will share their stories, their insights, their challenges. I've encouraged them to be sassy. In no order, but I'm going to ask you to raise your hand when I do introduce you. Julia Watts-Belzer is an associate professor here at Georgetown in the Department of Theology. Her research interests center on Jewish studies with a focus on the Talmud and Jewish ethics. She's exceptionally active in the Georgetown Disability Cluster and helping with the studies initiative here and at the American Academy of Religion. Lydia Brown. Lydia is a Georgetown alum who is now a law student at Northeastern University. Lydia also works as adjunct faculty at Tufts University, teaching on disability. Lydia famously started the blog Autistic Hoya when she was here. And talk about challenging Georgetown to dig deep and think deeply. Amongst many other things, Lydia's chair of the Massachusetts Developmental Disabilities Council. The list goes on. Teresa Blankmeyer-Burke. Staying here in D.C., Teresa is associate professor of philosophy at Gallaudet University, the first signing deaf woman in the world to receive a doctorate in philosophy, having attained her education through American Sign Language. And she's now working with the philosophy profession, with other deaf philosophers, to invent new signs to represent philosophical concepts, right? Which are actually also having philosophers think about those concepts themselves when they see how they're represented in ASL. We're going to talk about that. Rick Giuditti. Okay. Rick knows Cindy Crawford. Okay. So Rick is an award-winning photographer who began life as a fashion photographer. You're going to see some pictures up on the screen of people he's photographed. His business was all about photographing beauty. Hashtag Cindy Crawford. And then something happened 18 years ago that caused him to pivot. And he's been doing something with his photography quite different and transformative, and he's going to tell you about that. Donna Walton, also in D.C., Doctor of Education. Donna has worked in the disability program of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, served on many illustrious panels. She was inaugural member of the White House Disability Liaison in 2014, appointed to the National Disability Institute Board of Directors. She's a nationwide leader on this. She also wrote an article she's going to tell you a bit about called What's a Leg Got to Do with It? Thank you, Tina Turner. And started a website called Divas with Disabilities that you'll hear more about. Last but not least, very honored to have on our panel John Hockenberry, 4-time Emmy Award winner, 3-time Peabody Award winner, recognized worldwide for his career as a journalist and an author. A prominent member of the disabilities rights movement, John has also covered many wars. Okay. So he knows disability from many angles, including what our soldiers are experiencing. He's served as a distinguished fellow at MIT. He's been on the President's Commission for White House Fellowships. The list goes on. I think I got everybody. Let's start the conversation. So, John, I'd love to start with you. You're an accomplished war journalist. You've written that disability is often seen as a sort of fringe issue, whereas in your experience, you've come to believe that it's really one of the issues of our generation and a lens for rethinking what normal even is. Can you share just start us out with personal stories of your own experience of what disability has been like for you, how people have seen you, how people do and don't see you, given that you have a disability?
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. Up until today, I I have only been in the same room as Coach John Thompson and Patrick Ewing, one room, but as of today, I've now been in 2 rooms that Patrick Ewing and John Thompson have been in, and I'm thrilled about that as a basketball fanatic. I also know Cindy Crawford, which we won't talk about. That's very important. I want to start out by telling you, first of all, a couple of things about me. Once upon a time, I was in a car that went over an embankment a long time ago and went down a very steep cliff by the side of Route 80, and 3 people in that car, 2 people in that car died, 1 was injured slightly, and I received a permanent spinal cord injury as a result, and therefore I've been in a wheelchair since 1976. A lot has changed during that period of time. One of the things that's changed is that my wheelchair that I'm in today is very different from the wheelchair that I was in 30 years ago. Marianne, can I have my light cue for a second? I want you to look very closely at the front wheels on my chair and see what you can see there. All right? Now for the streamers, what I just did was roll around at the front of the stage and show them the LEDs that are in my front casters that my 6-year-old daughters, who are IVF twins, by the way. I have 2 sets of IVF twins and 5 children, so you might say I'm kind of a medical ethics theme park.
I was going to say.
I'm a theme park. I'm a medical ethics theme park. The issue I want to start with is something poignant and certainly serendipitous in an odd but very meaningful kind of way. Yesterday, my mother passed away suddenly after a long illness, and she maintained to her death that my accident and learning of my accident by a phone call that she received when I was in college was the worst day of her life. And for so long, she struggled to embrace, as I did, my normal experience as a living male, paraplegic, disabled person, overcoming the obstacles and dealing with the kinds of things that make it difficult to be disabled, but also enrich your life as a person, things I've written about and things that I won't go into. But among those things were the lights on my chair that my 6-year-old daughters insisted that I get. And when I would drop them at their elementary school, after I got these wheels, I remember the children in the classroom would gather around me and ask me to move around and roll around, and so they could see the lights, and they would jump on my lap and they would go on rides with me. And it was because I had made this decision to anoint my chair with this decoration, embracing the chair in a way that I didn't realize the consequences of, that the children in this elementary school would say, gosh, I wish I had a father who was in a wheelchair. My dad is so boring. And I had to explain to the dad when I would see him at drop-off and pickup that, in fact, it's okay that he doesn't have a wheelchair, and I hope I haven't disrupted his family in any way. But my mother embraced as best she could, but never really could embrace the idea that her son was not normal because he couldn't stand up and walk to her and give her a hug. And that's an element that I think everyone can understand here. And it's also a constraint, but an understandable constraint that keeps us from perhaps recognizing disability as a mainstream part of our lives, but it's also a challenge for us to do precisely that, because it is possible to achieve that notion, and we aren't all people with medical conditions, for instance. And I'll just say one more thing about Georgetown, that it's great to be in Healy Hall, and I think that it's possible to get a doctorate in disability studies just by getting into this building. So that's just an introduction to some of the things that make me believe that disability is an important mainstream experience, and it makes me very excited to be here amongst all of you students and disabled people and individuals on the panel who have done such extraordinary work.
Thank you, John. Teresa, I wanted to move next to you. As a member of the deaf community and a philosopher, you're also somebody I know from talking to you who's had long lived among many languages. I think your grandfather spoke Arabic.
Yes, he did.
You've got Spanish that you now still, or you speak Spanglish with one of your grandmothers, yeah?
Somewhat.
You know, of course, some Greek and Latin because you're a philosopher. And you speak ASL. And you've spoken in your writings about how fascinating American Sign Language is as a language. Talk to us about that.
Okay, thank you very much. Can everyone see me? Okay. All right, so thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here with everyone here on this panel. And you're right, language is a challenge. As well as when I grew up as a hard of hearing person, which meant that I was learning to speech read and trying to understand English in that sense, but also learning to try to hear the language that was being presented to me. So my father and grandfather actually, when he would speak to his mother in Arabic, we would write to each other in Spanish. So we would use Spanish plus English, but how we used the languages themselves, particularly with my family, was really without naming, in a sense. But my grandmother, Situ, I had to wait for the interpreters to kind of catch up with me. I didn't warn them I was going to use that term, so I'll let them catch up with me. So, which refers to grandparents in the Arabic language. It's a very precious word. It means beloved, or a sweet connotation for things like, we'll say for me, as a philosopher, I would use English. I was trained using English as the language of instruction. But I can remember the very first time I saw someone using American Sign Language, I was just enthralled. I thought, wow, that's a language that I can actually see. I don't have to read lips, I don't have to try to do all that. So I thought, okay, I'm ready to learn this language. And of course, it's always a challenge to learn languages, right? And I'm still learning American Sign Language, and I appreciate people who are willing to actually help me learn. So thank you. So I want to give you one example of how American Sign Language it's a beautiful language to tell stories. So I can remember one day, my son and I, we decided to actually go to his freshman orientation at his university. Now this happened at the university where I got my own PhD. So I was familiar with the university. My child was familiar with the university because he basically grew up there with me. And my son was saying, you know, I don't want to go there. I know the campus already. But I was thinking, this is the first time I was within the parent role. And I wanted to go and be a proud mother. You know, I was excited to take that role. And my son was like, you know, I said, come on. You know how a mother is like, come on, get over here, let's go and do this. So we walked over together, we sat down next to each other, and there was an interpreter there interpreting in front of us, so I was watching what was going on, and you could see my son just rolling his eyes, rolling his head around, and I'm like, you know, I'm the proud mother here, I'm the excited one, and he's just kind of sitting there. So at some point, the orientation was completed. The parents would go to one side of the room, the children or the students would go to the opposite side of the room. So I could see my son kind of just saunter over to his side with an attitude. And I saw a woman later who became my daughter-in-law, but at that time went right over to him and tapped him over on the shoulder. And he looked over and he was like, well, hello. And you could see with American Sign Language how I just became the character of my son, and you could see how I was actually depicting the story myself. So that's how I would depict how American Sign Language is really a beautiful language.
And three-dimensional, right? Expressive and visual.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
You can say hi to your daughter-in-law on the live streaming if you want to.
Hello.
Rick, let me...
Oh, hello.
Rick, let me move to you. As I mentioned, you started life as a fashion photographer. Your whole stock and trade was capturing what the media was telling you was counted as beautiful. Something happened, you made a big shift. It's the subject of an amazing documentary by Joanna Rudnick called On Beauty. And I actually want to introduce you and your project by having us take a look at a clip. Can you play the first clip?
The girls walked in for the first shoot and sat down, and I mean, that's how she sat. I know Rick's described this, but this is how she was.
When I first photographed the first girl, Christine, in my studio, when I was like, you are stunning. And then this kid just went, boom.
His motivation was to do a beauty story as Rick Guidotti, the fashion photographer. He hired the best stylist, right off the runway clothes.
Brought it to this one agent, and she said to me, well, this isn't what Condé Nast is doing. And I was like, excuse me 1 second, open the window, I was gonna jump out or push her out.
He went from company to company to try to sell them on the idea that just because they let Cindy Crawford keep her mole is not speaking highly of the inclusiveness of what's beautiful.
And I started thinking, well, Life magazine, why not? But I'm like, I don't know anybody at Life magazine, so I figured, well, I'll just call.
I just remember looking at them and going, wow, he just turned convention on its head.
Tell us about this project and how it started.
Well, you know, as a fashion photographer, my studio is in New York City. I also lived in Milan and Paris for several years, worked for lots of magazines, worked for the House of Yves Saint Laurent in Paris. And so, but I was always told, and working in the great industry, but I was always told who was beautiful. I was always told who the model of the moment was, who I had to photograph that season, who the new face was, and that would change the next season. So we would all change again, and everyone would see the beauty in this new face. But as an artist, I never saw beauty just on covers of magazines. I see beauty everywhere, everywhere, and it's so exciting to see that. And I was leaving my studio one afternoon, and I spotted this beautiful girl waiting for the bus at the corner of Park and 20th. And she was stunning, but she didn't have a pigmentation in her hair, her skin, or her eyes. She had the genetic condition albinism. She was so gorgeous, I wanted to grab her and say, I have to take your photograph. I've never met a model like you before. But the bus came, and she got on the bus and took off, and I'm so grateful that that happened because she was 12, and I would be in prison at the moment, so I'm glad that it didn't happen. But she was so, I ran the medical textbooks to find images of this gorgeous kid or friends of hers that looked just like her, and I didn't find them. I found really horrifying photographs. I found photographs of kids in their underwear against walls in doctors' offices with black bars across their eyes. And I thought, this has to change. We have to see beauty in diversity.
There's another video clip and a few of the stills that you took as part of that project. Walk us through those. I think the next video is up.
I think the clip, yep.
It feels pretty freeing. Just because you could do whatever you wanted on the bike when you had your helmet on. Take all your anger out on the track. People, they stare. Am I really that different that you have to stare?
People just see you on the street and that's albino. Instead of thinking, okay, that's Jane, you know? Yeah. They don't see us like a person.
So hi guys, I was a fashion photographer in New York City. I'm actually traveling around the world, photographing people with genetic conditions.
I had never thought of the power of a photograph as in the impact it would have in someone's life.
Where would you want to see Rick's photographs?
I think that it would make a lot of girls realize that there are people out there with differences.
As a fashion photographer, I bought hook, line, and sinker into that whole beauty idea. This is the face, this is what you do. And I thought, there's gotta be something else.
Connor, let me see, where are you? Oh, wait till you see this. Oh, listen, you're gonna die when you see this. Awesome! Wow! David, amazing! Look at him! Often when I'm photographing someone with a difference, somebody will come and see the photographs and say, you're really capturing their inner beauty. And I'm like, fuck inner beauty, these kids are gorgeous.
Jesus, you knucklehead.
God, that's fantastic. Wow. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Well, what do you say? I mean, it's kind of amazing. Well, one of the things that we do know, though, is when we're walking down the street and we see someone with a difference, we have two options generally. One is to either stare or look away. For the past 20 years, I've been working with people in a variety of differences and around the world, and they taught me that sometimes that looking away is even more painful. So creating these photographs and these exhibitions everywhere in the world is to create the opportunity to steady the glance, steady the gaze of the public, just long enough till you see beauty in that difference. And then all of a sudden you're completely overwhelmed with what we all share, which of course is humanity. Thank you.
Donna, I want to move next to you. So, I mean, Rick's project has been about see the person that has the disability. Don't just see a disability. And your own writings have really sounded that same theme and given examples from your own life of how people can see you as a person, and then if they find out about your disability, suddenly you're not a person. Share some of those stories with us.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm very, very grateful to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation to be a part of this distinguished panel. My experiences came very early. I knew that there was going to be a sort of a difference in the way my life was going to be lived and the way that my life was going to be perceived as a woman with a disability. So when I lost my leg, I guess as due to an amputation, the first message I got was that you're less than a woman. And this came through a story. I can share a story. This came through an example by a female rival. We were sort of competing for the same man, you can say. And she made it very clear to me that I would not win, if you will, because I was less than a woman because I had one leg. So that message was very early, and it was an extreme message to let me know that my life was going to be different and I was going to be judged on my difference. There's another example I can share with you. A young student of mine who came to my desk one day and said, Miss Walton, he says, are you married? And I said, well, no, I'm not. And he says, well, you know you're never going to get married. No one's going to ever marry you. Well, no man would marry you because you have one leg. That was an assault. Very early. The messages were early. The messages were instilled in him early that women were less than, women. They could not be sexualized. They could not be feminine because they were different, because they were missing a body part. And then the next example I can share with you that I knew that the assaults were going to be somewhat I was going to have to defend through education, through advocacy, and through activism as I later do and what I do now. It's an example that when I went to go to gynecologist and have medical appointments, and I would get the message that I was not a sexualized person because I would never get the question about are you sexually active in terms of my gynecological treatments. It was almost dismissed because, again, fearing that, well, not fearing, but I guess because I have a disability, because I have one leg, that it's impossible for me to be having sex. And I guess the last idea comes to mind of a young man who I dated prior to my limb being amputated, and then again after my limb was amputated. And he was very comfortable, as long as I wore my prosthesis. But as soon as I would remove my prosthesis, his whole attitude shifted to he was very uncomfortable, and eventually the relationship ended because he could not fathom sort of the one-leg thing, if you will. And that was sort of the impetus for my story, What's a Leg Got to Do with It? And I sort of carry that motto with me because it's basically, I never can really understand why the part of me missing, if you will, is always seen first rather than the whole person.
And he's dating a prosthesis now?
And they assumed that it had to be a woman, or it had to be a man and couldn't be a woman.
You had some funny stories, too, about the onset of online dating and the ability to flirt. And then when you have to have that first face-to-face date, the kind of tactics you would use. Tell us just a little bit about that.
Absolutely. You know, online dating was a phenomenon that I really enjoyed because I could hide behind the screen. But there was an opportunity, of course, when you had to meet your date. And I would always get to my sort of dates very early. I would go to the restaurant and I would be there, I mean, probably hours in advance of him arriving. And then, of course, when he did arrive, everything's fine until, guess what? I have to go to the ladies' room. Well, as soon as I get up to, get my cane, again, the whole attitude shifts. The idea that how can you be pretty and have a disability? It just does not compute. The whole idea of beauty then gets shifted, as Rick talked about. We look at beauty, we don't look at beauty, I guess, in terms of difference and diversity. We just look at if it's sameness, if it's sort of normalized, then it's pretty, then it's beautiful. Yeah. So I've been on a mission, if you will, to somewhat debunk those theories, of course, and through my online digital campaign called the Divas with Disabilities Project, hence the fur on my sleeves today. So it's just debunking the whole idea that you do not have to, just because you have a difference, you don't have to look that way. And we want society we want to shape the perception of what disability looks like, and that's what my project sort of aims to do.
So, Juliet, this issue that Donna's just mentioned about, it's how critical it is that people don't just see the disability, they see the whole person. Absolutely a critical point. You've also talked about wanting people to see you as a whole person and see your disability.
That's
Talk
right.
to us
For
about
me,
that.
I mean, I think it's a both and, right? Of course, I want people to see me as a person. But the idea that would somehow involve not paying attention to my disability. Like, sometimes people say to me, oh, I don't really see you as disabled. I'm like, really?
There's a chair right here.
Exactly. And that question of just looking, it feels like people are saying, I'm looking past so much of my life, so much of my own experience. Like they're not interested in it, just want to shear that away and get this very thin core of some kind of standard, normal self. I guess I'm just not that interested in being normal. I think of a story about that when I was born with a disability. I was born with cerebral palsy, and as a kid, I walked. And I had, shall we say, a kind of quirky stride. So many people, one of the refrains I heard over and over as a kid was walk right. I was a very compliant child. I tried. But here's the thing. I can remember one of my earliest memories is of listening to the sound of my own step. The little rock, slide, drag. The way my foot hit the ground, that was like my signature. That's part of the way I knew I was who I was. And here's the thing, I loved it. And I wasn't going to let it be erased.
Lydia. So you're, my goodness, an alum of Georgetown. You're now in law school. You're an incredibly active advocate on disabilities nationwide, and you find time to teach undergraduates at Tufts University.
Still never actually gave comments on their papers. I'm sorry if any of my students are watching this. I apologize.
Sorry. you've spent a lot of time thinking about how to make a classroom that allows for embedding learning differences. Talk to us about, I mean, I know this is something many of us have talked about. How do we allow for differences in, you've thought a lot about this. Tell us about your approach to how you construct your classroom, what you do with your students, and how they experience it from what they've talked to you about.
This starts with my own experiences as a student who, you know, from the time I was a child, I never quite felt that I belonged or fit in anywhere. Frankly, I still feel that way. I feel that I'm a perpetual outsider anywhere I go. When I was very active in my family's overall very conservative church, I openly identified as politically liberal, made it feel very uncomfortable, even though I felt very close to many people in the church. In the school environment, other students pegged me as being weird in many ways, and not just the socially acceptable. You're a little bit quirky, and you're that kind of weird. It's a little bit funny, but it's mostly acceptable, but weird in sometimes scary ways. When I was in high school, I was falsely accused of planning a school shooting. Earlier in school, I never really managed to fit in with any of the groups. I was gendered as a girl, but I wasn't a girly girl, I wasn't a tomboy, and I wasn't nerdy enough for the nerds, but I was still obviously a nerd. I got older.
Not even a normal nerd.
Right, I wasn't even that, right? I got older, I joined the autistic community. The autistic community has always been predominantly straight white men. In the LGBTQ community, as I've come out as a genderqueer person and an asexual person, I find that I'm still a minority. I am still at the margins. And what that's given me is a sense of how many people are constantly feeling outside, right? And that the space they're in isn't actually meant or designed with them in mind. So when I designed my classroom, I deliberately thought about how everyone exists in different ways. That means you can't tell someone's gender by looking at them, and I don't know if the names written on the attendance sheet are the names that the students actually use. It meant that I don't know how everyone learns. It meant that when I was thinking about what policies I want in my classroom, I decided there's not going to be only one way to turn in your assignments. You can turn in your assignments not just in the conventional writing format. When you write your paper, I don't care what style of citation you use as long as you keep it consistent and you don't plagiarize. When you write your paper, I don't care what approach you take to it. If you feel more comfortable with a literary analysis versus a scientific research paper, whatever feels like it is right for your learning style. One other important thing that I know we talked about was in constructing my technology use policy in the classroom, I very deliberately stated at the very beginning of the class in the semester, my policy is that you are allowed to use your laptop, your tablet, or your phone. Yes, your phone, in the classroom. What you can't do is have flashing lights or sounds from it, because that could be dangerous to some students. My rationale for that is that as many faculty, particularly I've noticed with a faculty that are very wedded to a traditional idea of the classroom as a place where you have to engage in a very specific manner. We don't want technology in the room. You'll be distracted. You won't be paying attention. I feel disrespected.
This is me, by the way.
Yeah.
So Lydia is actually describing me. I ban the use of laptops and phones in my classes because they've done empirical studies on what's called the zone of distraction. You're distracted and the people looking. And then Lydia and I were talking about this, and all of us, because I told you, I say, I ban this, but if you need technology support for your learning differences, come see me afterwards and we'll make an accommodation.
Which forces the disabled students to either forego what they need to actually succeed in the classroom or out themselves as disabled to the entire
To everybody
room.
in the classroom. The one person using a computer? So I'm changing my
If we
policy.
treat students as adults, even if we are not actually great at being adults, since I'm also still in law school, and for those of you that are students in the room, it's hell. Don't go. 0 out of 10. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. To fellow people from my law school watching this, fuck law school.
Oh dear.
But
Rick started it. I did include the clip that had the language in it, so okay.
I've sworn in meetings with federal agency heads. I think it's fine in Gaston.
I'm going to go with that too.
I wanted to acknowledge that one core concept in disability is dignity of risk. You're an adult. You're in my classroom. If you choose knowingly that you're going to be on Facebook the entire time and be distracted and then you don't do well, that's not really my fault because you chose to do that. But you could also be on Facebook because looking at Facebook is helping you pay attention.
Yes.
Looking at Facebook is the only thing keeping you grounded in reality because you have PTSD.
Yeah.
And something is traumatizing to you, even though I also have asked students about, can you let me know if you feel comfortable? If some conversations in this room, we spend a lot of the semester talking about violence, might be potentially re-traumatizing to you.
Yeah.
And this was, throughout the whole semester, I thought about how can I make my students feel like this is their space? I did that in both those little ways about asking my students, you don't have to sit in the chairs, you can sit on the floor and move in. You never have to ask permission to leave. You can turn in your assignments late as long as they get in by the end of the semester. I also did it in how I constructed the syllabus. I deliberately constructed a syllabus where all but one of the people that we read are disabled people who are also people of color and or queer or trans, which is almost unheard of in most disability classes, where a lot of times I've seen other syllabi, particularly from the middle of the country, where there's like 3 weeks on intersectionality.
My mother-in-law is from Iowa. Don't say middle of the country. Wait,
middle of the country also means Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay. So what I find fascinating about this is, given the multiple ways in which you've said you're an outsider, right, to so much of society, including like the disabled community in many ways, right, that it's very easy for us to get a halfway picture of difference, where you say, okay, now I understand the difference, and now that's what's normal for that difference, okay? As opposed to really pulling back and saying, what does it take for each individual person to flourish, which, by the way, having talked to Lydia, is absolutely consistent with being really tough and having very high intellectual standards in your classroom.
Although I would say, since the inauguration, I've been thinking to myself, thank God we didn't kill all the lawyers. So, your comments on law school.
Oh, I didn't get the connection.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to go back to Rick now, since I don't want to talk about the election. All right. Rick, I want to return to your work. So, you've done much with the Positive Exposure Project. I know you've got permanent installations in some museums and art galleries now. It's absolutely amazing. But I want to ask you more about that connection you mentioned about how medical texts and medical schools use images of people with, for instance, genetic differences. And you've got a project now called FRAME, Faces Redefining the Art of Medical Education, where you're working, he travels like every day, with medical schools and talking to medical students and developing a new portfolio of images for medical students. Talk to us about that, and I think you brought a video too.
When I first visited, I saw my first medical book and opened up and saw those scary photographs. I realized that we needed to somehow really kind of create opportunities to change that, to make sure that we don't just see because those anonymous faces and there's people that there's nothing there in those images. We need to be able to deliver that information to healthcare providers in training, but in a way that tells you who that person is, gives you a little bit more information. And as an artist, I find it so easy to do that, to capture that energy, that enthusiasm, that light in that individual. Never denying their difference, never denying their disability or their diagnosis, making sure they're there and we're proud of it. If you have a birthmark, just say it, show it to us, and be proud of that. Never be ashamed of that. I go to medical schools now, not because I want to teach science to medical students, but because I can actually say things like arthrogryposis multiplex congenita, and I know what that means. And I'm sorry, guys, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Spell that out. That's hard.
But I do that, and I go, because I know all these great kids. It's not because I studied it in a medical textbook, but I went to a family conference and met all these gorgeous kids and their families, and now I bring med students and healthcare providers in training with me to all these family conferences. Last summer I went to 15 alone in the summer months. That's usually when they are. And I bring med students and genetic counseling students and I shove them in daycare and I lock the door. And I check back on them at the end of the day and they always have like a little poop on their shoulder and gum in their hair, but they're going to be better healthcare providers because they've met these kids not in crisis. They met these kids not in the clinical environment. They met these kids being kids, and it's pretty amazing. So it's great.
Let's see the video on this.
Oh, sure. I think we have.
Yeah.
As a medical student, I saw those pictures. I saw those pictures used to teach us about genetic conditions. People look as if they've never had a slice of pizza. They've never seen a movie. You know, they've never kissed anyone. And if that's what you see and that's what you learn, you'll never be a doctor that listens to your patients. Because those pictures look as if they're people that don't have anything to say. Seen a movie, you know, they've never kissed anyone. And if that's what you see and that's what you learn, you'll never be a doctor that listens to your patients. Because those pictures look as if they're people that don't have anything to say.
I think we have some images here as well. Some of the images that I go to medical schools, we have exhibitions everywhere. This is the first photograph I saw of Marfan syndrome. Now, Marfan syndrome is a connective tissue disorder. You grow very, very tall. You're at risk of having an aortic dissection, scoliosis associated with that. And so these are the images, and I understood the importance to show a healthcare provider how does Marfan syndrome present itself. But then speaking to some of my great friends with Marfan syndrome and using my talents as a photographer, the next photograph, please, you'll see the same condition, the same gorgeous long arms, but you see Billy. You get to know Billy, and you'll never forget Marfan syndrome once you meet Billy. Next slide. You'll see there's some of my friends. My great friend, this is Ronan. Ronan has Prader-Willi syndrome. I often just exhibit the photographs. We have a permanent installation going in the Children's Hospital and in Brigham in Boston and the Museum of Tolerance in LA. And sometimes the images are just Ronan and what he loves to do. But when I go into the medical environment, we talk about Ronan, but then we also talk about his condition, which is Prader-Willi syndrome. Next slide. That's my great friend Guadalupe, and she has Down syndrome. Next slide. My friend Jasper. Jasper has Angelman syndrome. And this is Sonny, and Sonny has cerebral palsy. He's it's just an amazing kid. That was the first day he got his wheels, and there was no stopping him. He was just amazing. Just a gorgeous kid. Next slide. And these are friends of mine. These are twins. They're brothers in Tanzania. I'm doing a lot of work with the albinism community in East Africa where witch doctors currently, not a million years ago, but currently are saying, bring me the bones of an albino, and I'll make a potion that will make you rich. So these kids are getting murdered on the way home from school. These boys were sent to a very special area where it's patrolled by armed security men. We're working, it's not all traditional healers. There's a lot of wonderful people in East Africa. It's just a few really bad people. So we're actually working very closely with a lot of the medical students and the teachers and communities and families, spreading the words that witch doctors' bones are even more valuable. So hopefully that'll catch on. But these atrocities are still going on today, and we're working very hard to raise awareness and change that. Thank you.
Some of your friends have Marfans and are in the movies.
Yeah.
I mean, people probably here have seen some great actors who have Marfans.
Awesome.
That's great stuff.
So, Teresa, let me go back to you. So, as a member of the deaf community, the community's done an amazing job at starting to get to ask the question. Many people without disabilities can start to think, okay, there might be, we should accept diversity and accept difference, but wouldn't it be better if we didn't have the disability? And the deaf community has been really interesting in turning that paradigm on its head and asking us to move from talking about hearing loss to deaf gain. Tell us a bit about that movement.
Sure. So one of the things I want to do is, I'm assuming the mic is on because I can't hear it. I think it's important, before I talk about deaf gain, to talk about the importance of recognizing the diversity within the deaf community. Some of us use ASL, speak English. I grew up hard of hearing. I learned ASL later. Some people are oral deaf or hard of hearing. They only use a spoken language. Some people know more than one sign language. It's a very diverse community. And part of what I'm always faced with is the ethical decision of which language do I use? Because language is representation. And so if I opt to use a language that's spoken, does that give a chit, if you will, to the spoken language community and undermine the importance of the signing deaf community, which is my heart? This is a community that has absolutely transformed my life, and I've received amazing benefit from it, not just because I picked up a sign language, but because of the way that I see the world, because of deaf gain. So deaf gain, it's this idea, let's flip hearing loss on its head, and what things do you gain from being deaf? Now, many deaf people don't lose hearing. We've just always been this way. It's the way we are in the world. And so if you are a sighted deaf person, and again, going back to this notion of diversity, deaf people may be deafblind, may have low vision, may be wheelchair users. I mean, there are all kinds of deaf people. But if you are a sighted deaf person and you use this visual, tactile language, there are things that you pick up. If you are using a spoken language or a sign language, you're attending with your vision. So there is that attending with the gaze that is different from how a hearing person interacts, who may pay attention and then there's a noise and the eyes shift just a little bit, and whatever that contact you have looking at each other, it drops for a second. So what is it to be in a body where you are always attending? So this is one example of that.
And I also love that you were pointing out or naming the question of if somebody has a disability, one mode is you were in one type of body or had one type of mind, and then, as with John or with you, Donna, a violent disruption happens, okay? And that is traumatic, right? It doesn't mean there's not a different way of having this new body or this new mind that you come to and find the goods of it. But some people with disabilities, right, that is normal for them. That is, the body they have, right, with cerebral palsy is their home. That's what feels normal. And if it changed in a sudden violent disruption, that would be traumatizing. It's about what body and what mind are your home and are familiar to you. And I do think that's a point that when we think about disability, it can help us. And I know that some people have talked about, so deaf parents, let's say, if they have a genetic condition that caused the deafness, it might be passed down to their children, okay? And some in the deaf community, not all, parents are different, right? But just as some parents sometimes at least secretly hope their kids will be like them, you know, or Uncle Jimmy, some people who are deaf hope that the child has the same condition they do. Talk just about that a little bit.
Sure. So yeah, some deaf people would like to have a deaf child. And I think the motivations for this are going to be across the board. If you think about the adage that people will often refer to, ask the question of, would you rather have a girl or a boy, or do you know whether you're carrying a girl or a boy? And sometimes the answer is, I just want a healthy baby. Now that in itself
is interesting.
Is a question that circles around this notion of normalcy and disability. And for many deaf people, included in that basket of whatever those characteristics are that make up a healthy baby, deaf or hearing are both in there. This sense that as parents we want to have children who are like us, I think comes from a desire to share with your child the things that you cherish. And so hearing people who value the sound of music or the experience of making music or the sound of, I don't know, birds chattering in the trees might really grieve. And I think we have to acknowledge this, those of us in the deaf community. This is, if you have a secondary loss, that is, your child doesn't have something that you hope they would have, there is a grieving process that goes on. If you have a certain kind of body and it shifts, that's also a grieving process. And I think to sweep that under the rug is absolutely not what we want to do. What we want to do is have conversations about the different ways we are in the world. So you are a deaf potential parent. Now, why do you want a deaf child? Is it so that you can share the things that you love about your deaf community? Maybe. Some people say, well, but if you have a hearing child, that child can learn sign language and appreciate the deaf community too. So why have the preference for one? And I think sometimes it's experiential, but sometimes you think you might be a better parent to a certain kind of person. Now, anyone out there who's been a parent knows that you may have a vision of what parenthood is going to look like, and then all of a sudden you have these instances where you have to adjust. I am absolutely not a crafty person. I don't do art and this sort of, I'm words, philosophy, poetry, everything with words. Well, I have a daughter who is incredibly artistic and creative. And so it was always, Mommy, can we draw? Mommy, can we do these things? And because it's your child, because you love your child and you want to see your child flourish, you do those things. And I think this is a lesson that if you think about how different people are, not just thinking about disability, but what Lydia has said about all these different kinds of diversity that she embodies, and we all do. To bring someone into your life who is different from you is an opportunity to explore a different part of yourself that you might not ever have done without that relationship.
Can I just ask Teresa one thing? Because that's so provocative and extraordinary. And since we live at a time, and you've probably discussed this here at the Institute for many years, we live at a time where people select genetically to exclude disabilities and abort for Downs and other disabilities, and yearn for the time when they can select for more disabilities to abort, and are suggested that that is a good idea from the medical community, and we're groping and dealing with that. How has cochlear implant technology manifested itself in the deaf community as a disruption or an enhancement or as an ability to experience both of these things that you're talking about at once, or as something extraordinarily controversial? Because I know it as a journalist from the non-disabled community and from within the deaf culture community, which I should say is one of the most rich and intensively sophisticated disability culture communities in the world.
Well, so my first response is it's so complicated and we don't have nearly enough time tonight to talk about all of these issues. But I will say that the way cochlear implants were framed as this deaf community opposition versus the medical community and hearing parents of deaf children wishing to have it. Now, that may have been the case a long time ago, but it's so much more complicated now. I know people who come from multi-generational deaf families themselves, so the parents are deaf, their children are deaf, and their child receives a cochlear implant. I know children who grow up with the cochlear implant and they say, no more, I do not want this. This is not who I am. And they take it out. And then you have people who maybe put it on for some instances and take it off for others. You have this question of, which I think as a bioethicist who works in this area, maybe cochlear implants are sort of phasing out, and we have genetic technology and all sorts of emerging technologies coming in. And if we focus on this discussion, well, then we can't, as bioethicists and as the deaf community, get ahead and start talking about these other things that have the potential to not only change the community, but possibly, and I think particularly with genetic technology, and this is my main area of research, to, if not extinguish the community entirely, make it so that a critical mass no longer exists to carry the culture and the language forward.
How do we learn from your experience in the deaf community as the wider community in civilization these lessons? Because I think they are so important, and very few people outside of the deaf community understand these conversations, and they're civil rights conversations. They're as important as Martin Luther King, as the kinds of things we're struggling with here in America.
It's a great question, and I don't have a simple answer, but I will point here to my students. I teach a class on on bioethics in the deaf community, and I've given them a charge, which is you learn this information, you go out into the community, you talk to others, and how you interact with the community is how we get our story out.
Beautiful. Julia, I want to turn to you, and I want to make sure to ask you about some of the intersection of disability work with your work as a religious scholar of religions. And I remember one thing you said when we were chatting a while ago, that it's so interesting in many, not all, religious texts, disabilities are represented throughout the text as something to be cured.
Yeah, I think religiously we have this fascination. There's often, right, in many religious traditions, this kind of fascination with curing, right, with a sort of miracle moment, disability as an occasion by which miraculous power could be made manifest in the world. But another side of that is teaching significant in both Jewish and Christian traditions, the idea that all people are made in the image of God. And the way I like to take that, a kind of disability-centered way of taking that, would be to say, yeah, that means disability is also in the image of God. I think a lot of times we've got a kind of fascination about a sort of hyper-capable God. God is like the ultimate able figure. Like, that's what we worship. Ability, power, capability, no limits. And I think that we project that often onto our religious lives as well. I've actually been really interested in playing with the image of what does it mean to really imagine and encounter a God who has disability experience. For me, it was profoundly provocative. When I encountered and felt reading the book of Ezekiel, the first chapter of the book of Ezekiel, talking about God and the divine chariot, I was like, God has wheels. And for me, as a wheelchair user, that moment, such a powerful sense of kinship. I'm like, now I want to know, what does a wheeled God know? Yeah. As a wheeler, right, as somebody who wheels through the world, I have a very profound sense of like vibration, right? I feel surface ride up, like the terrain, the landscape rides up through my wheels, through the balls of my feet, into my body, in my arms. Whenever I take my chair out, I love a good downhill, right? Not too steep, but just a good, nice, smooth, gentle grade. That kind of spin, I feel like that gives me, as a wheeler, some insight into how God moves through this world. And it flips that idea that disability is just a lack, a loss, a sad, tragic condition, to like, Sometimes it's fun. Sometimes it's really frustrating, don't get me wrong. Sometimes it's really terrible. But a lot of times it's exquisitely beautiful.
Especially when there's new fallen snow.
Yeah.
So great.
It's gorgeous. Let me move back to you, Lydia. So you've written and spoken extensively about autism, and about you've written about or spoken about the two tendencies that people sometimes have when asking an autistic person to talk about the community or something like that. Two kind of tendencies that can happen. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, and it's not specific to autistic people. It's happened to me a lot as an autistic person, but I hear this with other disabled people and other marginalized people too, that we're caught between these two competing poles of both very ableist, very fucked up ways of approaching us. The first one of which, I swear more than a sailor, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
And the first one is this idea that, oh, well, you can talk about being autistic and your opinions and your perspectives about what that means, about disability politics, but that's just you. You only speak for yourself, you're an individual, and also you talk and you went to college, so you must be super high functioning and not really know what it's like to be disabled. You have not lived my life. And we're gonna just dismiss everything you say. Treat it as, it only applies to you, Lydia Brown, and we cannot let you, in this very condescending, patronizing way, we cannot let you speak about disability from a political or a philosophical angle. The other pole of that is the conflation of me with every other autistic person. That you were expected to speak as a representative for all people whose brains work like yours. That if I say, well, I don't think in language, then apparently all autistic people must think the exact same way as me, right? And both of those are fundamentally flawed because they don't recognize that, yeah, actually all autistic people, or all people with any marginal experience, do share core commonalities. That's part of what creates group identity, group experience, collective trauma, right? But we can be individual and unique from one another, and at the same time still be able to embody collective knowledge and collective history.
It's beautiful. So it's once again this tendency to see somebody with a disability as representing all people with that disability. Oh, this token, that's what they are like, right? Is once again seeing just the disability. Because humans, right, I mean, bell curve, we're different in all sorts of ways. Some of us are really nice, some of us are really irritable, you know what I mean? And the fact that you've got one leg or two legs doesn't say where you are on that bell curve, right? So it's returning to that theme of seeing somebody as a person and seeing their disability.
Donna, I want me as, you know, all parts of who I am.
Yes, beautifully put. Donna, you've talked too about intersections, and you've talked about this sort of triple jeopardy.
Yes.
That you can experience since you're a woman, you are a black woman, you're a black disabled woman. Talk a bit about that.
Yes, the triple jeopardy syndrome was sort of coined back in 1990 by a researcher by the name of Eddie Glenn, and she talked about these three minority groups that were always going to be conspiring against you, and that would be being female, disabled, and your race. And I've seen that somewhat. I sort of live that every day in the way I go about my world. And I can give you an example of how it really shows up in terms of employment, for example, if I go for a position and I know that I'm extremely qualified for that position, but I may not get that job. Now, I walk away knowing or not knowing, which of those sort of groups conspired against me? Was it because I was black? Was it because I was disabled, or was it because I'm female? And those are always operatives that I'm just never aware of. Another example, I think, that when it was blatant, at a television station, I went for an interview to be a reporter, and there were several parts to the interview, and the last part of the interview included, of course, the face-to-face. And so the interviewer
shared with me that you did wonderful on the writing, everything was fine, but I have one question for you. And he says, if you had to run for that story, how would you get it? Well, at that moment in time, it was no doubt, and this is pre-ADA, I should clarify.
American with Disabilities Act.
Pre-ADA. And, but at the time, it was really, I guess, evident that my disability would be used to discriminate against me. And so it's always a matter of being in sort of the schizophrenic ideology, or you're living in these kind of schizophrenic ways of knowing what is really happening. What's the attitude that persons are really seeing me?
Yes.
Are they judging me, or how they're judging me? And it's almost like you can't hide it. And I say that in my earlier days, however, as I did try to hide it, because I never wanted to be, it was just too many operatives working against me. So I would sometimes go into an interview and I would not use my cane. And I clearly need my cane to help me ambulate, but I would leave my cane and go into the interview without it, so that I would not have that a judgment that was obviously visible. Perhaps it would just be perceived that I sprained my ankle, twisted my hip.
See.
I don't know. But I'd never want to have all of these things working. So it's always a challenge to always be confronting these discriminatory factors.
John, you had a...
Sure.
I wanted to add a little bit to what you were saying too, Donna, because we had a chance to speak a little bit beforehand. We know and work with a lot of the same folks who live at the intersections of race, disability, gender, and so on. And I want to add, on this conversation about deaf gain and how we can revision disability as not just being a negative thing, and bridge those a little bit. And you'll forgive me if I want to pull this back throughout this conversation. Part of my experiences that are part of who I am, the fabric that you can't pull them apart, like you can't pull apart your blackness from your womanhood, from your disabledness, right? Is that I'm a transracial, transnational adoptee into a white US family. And transracial and transnational adoption, particularly by white families of children of color, has come with this history of what some of us will call a white savior complex, this notion that narratively, the more civilized, advanced societies, that is white, hyper-able societies, are the ones that have to pull up and rescue children of color, black and brown and other of color children. And something that I noticed in your slideshow, Rick, I wanted to call attention to this, was even how this weaves its way into our narratives, and how when we're in conversation, we all see things that are very different from one another. And one thing that struck me about your last segment in talking about the witch doctors in East Africa was that there's very much an angle that struck me as someone who embodies this result of a hyper-able white culture, is the idea that this is something that's horrific and inhumane that those people over there do to the disabled children, that people in East Africa will do really terrible things to albino children, which obviously trying to kill albino children and doing so to harvest their bones is a horrible example of ableism. But in narrative, in context, making it sound like that's something that's not really a problem here.
Rick, do
and
you want to speak
disabled
to
people
this?
here are constantly subjected to violence, particularly those that live at those intersections that Don and I have been talking about a bit. And so, that's one thing that this is something that this gives me, a new framing that maybe you didn't have. And I wanted to share that because I felt it's very important to address that in this space, because I don't know who's here.
And before I ask Rick to respond, I appreciate this point. The statistics on who are the victims of violence, people with disabilities are radically overrepresented. Okay? Police brutality, people with disabilities, radically overrepresented. So this issue about violence is a real one.
Right,
I know,
but it's black
hang on.
and brown disabled people that are most targeted by
Absolutely,
police. It's not
and then there's
just
the intersection.
disabled people.
Did you want to just speak a little to that, and then I want John to have the last word before we open it up to the audience.
Sure. For me, working with the communities that I've been so fortunate to work with, it really is about creating opportunities to challenge stigma and celebrate diversity. But really, let's start that dialogue. We created the Frame films, which are a series of very short, but like 5-minute films for healthcare providers, presenting all the basic hallmarks of a certain condition, but as presented by somebody living with that condition, that difference themselves or their families. Starting the dialogue across all borders. We need to start talking about difference.
John?
President Obama urged us to get out of our bubbles and to become participants in democracy if we wanted to save our democracy, something which I think will be something that we are all doing, and here at this event I think we are doing that as well. We should note that culture can be that bubble, and that cultural traditions and privileges and colonialism and all of these collisions of different peoples on the planet are the experience that we are having right now, and trying to recognize the difference between what is culturally appropriate and what is an atrocity is a very difficult challenge for all of us, dealing with the albinism example that you were talking about. But we need to get out of these bubbles. We need to move into a frame where we can allow for all of us to exist. Donna had such a fantastic story there, and it reminds me of a piece of research that we did at Dateline when I was with NBC, where we're going to do an expose on disability discrimination in the workplace. And I said, oh, that's ridiculous. You'll never be able to do it. And the able-bodied person who I was discriminating against, was Asian, by the way, I said, no. Why do you think we can't do this? Right? Well, I'm going to go in and you're going to film me and I'm going to have an interview and then we're going to go out and I'm not going to get the job. And what am I going to do? You're going to interview me and I'm going to say I'm bummed out, I didn't get the job. But I have no idea what's going to actually happen. And he says, no. And he picked a surrogate that was from the Georgetown community, actually, here. And we filmed him going in to get a job. And then right afterwards, we filmed an able-bodied person going in to get the same job.
So sorry, the first guy had a disability?
First guy was a paraplegic like me.
Okay.
Second person was completely able-bodied. Some were older, some were different races, some were different ethnicities, some women, men. We had a diversity in our able-bodied group. Our poor surrogate by the name of Brian, who was so keen to catch these businesses discriminating, when we showed him the film of everyone who was not disabled getting the job that he had interviewed for and thought that he had a chance to get, and when he looked at the video and saw that he had no chance at any point to get any of the jobs, it was emotionally devastating to him, and that was discrimination right there. So what Donna is talking about, this triple jeopardy thing, is amazing. And as we struggle today with trying to figure out what is white privilege, what is racism, I've been having discussions about how whiteness trumps disability in my real world. And this has been the case all around the world. I've often thought when people are looking at me as a war correspondent, they see the wheelchair. No, they see the white American. And they're not even seeing the wheelchair at all. These are experiences that I've had again and again, and we are confronting these today. I'll tell you one last story, and it's about the movies. There's a movie called $1 Million Baby that was an Academy Award-winning film of Clint Eastwood's, which is about a boxer who became a quadriplegic. By the way, I always thought God was a quadriplegic.
Sure.
Yeah, there we go. So good. So you're confirming this to me. Because she became a quadriplegic as a result of an accident, she wanted to commit suicide, and the character in the film helped her to commit suicide. And that was seen as appropriate, that in fact people who become quadriplegics would want to kill themselves. In fact, when I had my accident, I'm just a paraplegic. I was asked so many times if I wanted to kill myself that I thought maybe there's something wrong with me. And I actually talked to a therapist, should I want to kill myself to be normal? And they said, no, it's fine. The statistics are, in fact, that more people who are teenagers, who are college students, want to commit suicide. Veterans have a rate of committing suicide far higher than people with disabilities. Even quadriplegics, high C1 quadriplegics, have an extremely low rate of suicide. They embrace the disability. They want to live lives. I interviewed Jude Law one time, who was in the movie Gattaca, which
Okay,
you may
can I
know
just
about.
pause and say that's really cool?
Yeah, thank you very much.
So, Cindy Crawford and Jude Law?
Yeah, there we go. I mean, we got the marquee here on this stage, that's for sure. Jude Law was in this movie Gattaca, and he read my memoir, Moving Violations, as preparation, because he played a disabled individual who was genetically inferior, and Gattaca was all about making a genetically pure human race, and the storyline was he was hiding from the genetic purists by using the DNA of another actor who was, I think it was Heath Ledger, if I'm not mistaken, but anyway, he was in a wheelchair, and the director put him in a wheelchair, and this of course was the future Gattaca, that was taken straight out of a hospital waiting room. It had high armrests. It was a really rickety chair. It had solid, tires. It didn't even have air tires in it. It was a clunker. It was a clunker. Oh my God, it was a horrible clunker. And Jude said to me that he had prepped for the movie by reading my book, and I had this occasion of interviewing him on something completely different, and he was so thrilled to sit and talk with me. And he said, I wanted so much to reflect the experience that you had in your book about embracing disability, and the director resisted every step. He made me be a victim. He made me be pathetic, and I hated that, and I've always wanted to tell you that. I got a call 3 days ago from a man who's remaking the movie, a French movie called The Intouchables, about a quadriplegic who hires a African-American assistant. It's a very intense and amazing story about a quadriplegic attempting to go on with his life, and the person who is his assistant who kicks his ass, quite frankly. But also the quadriplegic kicks the assistant's ass as well. It's an amazing story. It's being remade, set in New York. And the director, Neil Berger, called me up and said, John, I wanted to ask you, we get disability wrong a lot in Hollywood. Can we just sit down and have a conversation about what we miss, what we do wrong? And we talked for 2 hours, and he paid the check. And it was a great conversation, and it suggests that we've come a long way, and we are getting together on these conversations. They're extraordinary conversations. They're about civil rights. They're about ethics. They're about medicine. They're about civilization. And I'm thrilled to be here with all of you.
Let's open it. We have to open it up to the audience. That was a
to add something very quick.
But in one sec, because I want to get the audience in too.
Yep.
Okay, so we have 2 people who have handheld mics. We're looking for the handheld mics. There's one. If you raise your hand. Okay, I'm going to start with Fran. And there's also an interpreter who can, if somebody wants to sign a question. Okay. You're next.
Hello there. Thank you all very much. A wonderful and moving experience to be here. And John, you mentioned some of the films that you worked on, and you all may know Marvel and the famous X-Men and Professor Xavier, who's in the wheelchair. Yeah. There are blind representations in comic books, and Geordie LaForge in Star Trek with the visor, and that sort of thing that suggests that he can see. They suggest that he could have been made to see, but instead chooses to experience life with the visor. And so this makes me think about the lives that we have today and the ability to alter DNA, to modify it, to eliminate potentially deafness or other traits. But deaf families also want to consider if they have potential offspring that don't have deaf genes to potentially insert that and make those children deaf. And then very often, in fact, in the UK, there were court battles over the right to do so. Mm-hmm. And so where then do we get real data on the experience of visual nature and visual language. Laura Ann Petito in the VL2 Center at Gallaudet, Visual Language, Visual Learning Research Center, has begun to collect data that has found critical findings about signed language and its impact on deaf children growing up, and whether or not they're receiving cochlear implants, that they benefit from sign language. So I would like to know what you all can do to promulgate the message that disability need not be regarded the way it is and need not be continuing these traditions of ableism. Thank you for that work, and what can you do to continue that?
Can I comment?
Well, Teresa, I think he was, do you want to say?
As a deaf philosopher, of course, I do appreciate data, but there are two different kinds of arguments to use in this approach. But I'm putting on my philosopher hat. So, first of all, the idea of instrumental reasoning. Instrumental reasoning refers to the idea that this data is gathered for the sake of supporting that group in and of itself because of its own value. So the fact that peripheral attention is better among those who are deaf, and because the world is better because of having deaf people in it. So that's an instrumental approach to say that this data finds that deaf people in deaf communities are themselves intrinsically worth preserving and valuable to have. That's an intrinsic argument as opposed to the instrumental one. And so whether an intrinsic or an instrumental argument will serve best to create policy changes is a difficult question. But it all begins with sharing these narratives that we have shared tonight and others share. So very often when we talk about how people with disabilities can be brought up to lives that are on par with abled citizens, that there's a narrative that, yes, indeed, we do want to make sure that we live lives with that kind of equity, but we also need to consider flourishing and what it means to live a flourishing life. What does it look like to be deaf and to live a life that is flourishing and fully realized, as rich and realized as any life could be, with their own dreams, goals, and that really, I think, is the heart of the question.
I would say on that, it is contingent upon us sharing literature of the experience of deafness, literature of the experience of paraplegia and physical disability. We want to be careful about data, because if data becomes the trigger for okay, you deserve to live because we have data that suggests you have some sort of additive quality that means it's okay, we've proved it scientifically. We have to remember as a basic first principle that we are living in a time in human history where people with disabilities are living because of the success of civilization. It is not some accident or some affliction that is happening. This is a collective advantage and a collective attribute of the power, positively, of civilization. And so beginning to create a narrative where they can all flourish is an imperative for all of us in civilization right now. If we can believe in that additive idea, I think the questions of data all will support this notion of flourishing. If we get into triggers and we proved it in the lab that it's okay for you to live, that's a really scary thing, and that's what we want to avoid.
Fran, you had your hand up.
Let's just sit here, right?
Yes.
Thank you for coming here and doing this, and Maggie, thank you. And I'm very proud to have my name associated with this. I would love to hear your reactions or your thoughts about how are there employers who look for people with disabilities to enrich their employment experience, and are there recruiting firms that help people with disabilities, a place where you can go and find employers who are welcoming and helpful?
Absolutely. I think I can address
Yeah.
that one. With the idea of diversity and inclusion, it's this model that most federal agencies do work from. So being persons with disabilities are encouraged to apply. And they're encouraged to apply under a particular Schedule A sort of mandate, if you will, that says that, you know, if you are a qualified person with a disability, then you automatically should be hired and accepted into the workforce. How that's encouraged, though, or how that's maintained is where the disconnect becomes. Retaining individuals. So once they're welcomed into the workplace, but then accommodating them becomes the real challenge. And that's what most policy is working on right now, ensuring that they can maintain the workforce of persons with disabilities. So you can certainly have this inclusive, if you will, diverse environment. In terms of recruitment, there's a real push right now, I should say, to hire veterans with disabilities, of course. So most private companies will not really say we're looking for persons with disabilities. They always say we're welcoming. You know, they have to go by the equal employment opportunity, you know, laws, of course. But the idea is that when you apply for positions, that you should be able to go in blindly. When I say that, meaning your resume should speak for itself. And that most persons with disabilities go into these workplaces. And they are, you know, I don't want to say that we've made great strides. We have in some instances, but for the most part, we have a long way to go. Because the workplaces sometimes are not just set up for us, are not set up for persons with disabilities. They're just still not welcoming in terms of accommodating them in terms of how they work. As Lydia was talking about, you know, if workplaces could be synonymous with classrooms, with, you know, individualized, meaning a supervisor could know the work style of each employee, I think we would have I think there'd be more persons with disabilities in the workforce.
Just to add to that, since
Lydia.
you asked about specific just to add to that, since you asked for specific organizations, microphone was not on. Outside of the federal government, there are some private sector initiatives that are disability hiring focused, like Google Lime Connect. And there's the U.S. Business Leadership Network, which has chapters across the United States, which is focused on disability-specific recruitment and hiring. In regard to autism, there are actually some companies, specifically in the STEM sector, that are deliberately recruiting specifically autistic people as employees. And that model has attracted both a lot of praise and a lot of criticism. There are a number of reasons why. My politics are not a secret. I am very anti-capitalist, so that is another long story. Won't go into it. But I think also, just to re-emphasize the point that Donna made about workplaces not being accessible, I just want to add a little bit of flavor to that too, and note that I know of a lot of disability-focused organizations that do not actually accommodate their disabled employees, including disability rights organizations, and this is a lot of them. I could provide a lot of stories and enough fodder for a lot of lawsuits, but I won't. So I would say
Hashtag live streaming, yeah.
Yes, most important is not can we just recruit people, but why aren't we recruiting certain people? Is it because we're not offering health care as a benefit? Is it because we're not offering salaries that someone can actually live off of when they have complex health needs and they need to see specialists? And with the potential repeal of the ACA, they might have even already passed what were previously lifetime caps, if depending on what disabilities they had, or if they're being kept in a lower level position, like, oh yes, we have now hired 5% employees with disabilities into our large company, but how many are in management?
I want to add one historical connection here. Okay. Not too long ago, women were regarded as not fit for the workplace. And when the courts looked at what the barriers to women coming in to the workplace were, some cultural, some discriminatory, sure, but a lot was the institution and structures of the workplace weren't designed for women, in particular mothers, parents, in mind. Okay.
It has helped, we know this empirically, the workplace, when we said, what would a workplace look like that was designed around welcoming in people with young children, who, by the way, are increasingly also taken care of by men. What would it look like to design the workplace to accommodate real people? And what we found is not only did you get more women into the workplace, so it was good for them, but the productivity and the diversity of approaches and thinking that came into the workplace radically has improved productivity. I think the same thing is true, as we're now seeing, with people with physical and mental differences. Okay.
There's great data, in fact, and since you're from the philanthropy community, something that you should Google is the Ruderman Foundation, which has done amazing work in trying to get exactly the issues of healthcare and salaries addressed for people with disabilities to be employed, and looking at models that will track them into those kinds of jobs. There's fantastic data in retail that sidewalks and built spaces in urban areas that are ADA compliant are viewed as more modern and therefore viewed as more
cool,
sophisticated and cool, and those stores get more traffic, and so therefore the real estate prices for those establishments in those corners are higher priced, and the market is actually being driven by that. If you go to Mexico City Airport, you will see scores and scores of individuals in wheelchairs, because the people who handle virtually all of the administrative and sort of logistical details of getting passengers from their ticket space to the airplane are all people in wheelchairs or people with physical disabilities. I told my daughters, when you go to Mexico City, they flew there last summer, I said, see if you see anything unusual about Mexico City Airport without telling them what they were going to see. When they got to their grandmother's place in Merida, they called me up immediately and said, Dad, Mexico City Airport is full of people with wheelchairs. And they were so thrilled and happy about that. The world is changing.
I think we have time for one more question. All the way there.
Hi, I'm Julia. I'm a freshman here. And this is a question primarily for Donna and John. Having had, I guess, quote unquote, 18 or 19 years of normal childhood and adolescence, can you recall a moment that you came to terms with your new normal, having been disabled?
Beautiful. Donna?
That's a good question. I'm still on the journey. I mean, my new normal is being defined all the time. I would say that I lost my leg when I was 18, and I guess I'm always evolving to who I am as a woman today in terms of my disability. I like to look at it, my disability and I coexist. We live together, we hang out. And some days we don't get along too well. And I sometimes bemoan that. But what I do appreciate is that I can establish that new normal for myself. I don't make that a standard for anyone else but myself. In fact, I sort of look at my body and I think when I don't have my prosthesis on, I love my symmetry, and I'm like, wow, this is real. I like this. So this is the way I like to look. And sometimes it's interesting because I will view other women and saying, well, they're kind of crooked to me, because I kind of see myself. So so normal, it's always, I'm coming to terms with it all the time, because every day is not the same.
Beautiful, John.
My dear friend who's a double amputee, Amy Mullins, has 24 prostheses, some which make her 7 feet tall, some which make her a different height. She says, my prosthesis is a fashion accessory. And she is indeed on the journey and speaks of the journey of finding a normal. I think of myself as a laboratory and an engine for the invention and creation of the roadmap of normal. And in every experience that I've had, becoming a parent, becoming a man, becoming a husband, I had my accident when I was 19. My experience of disability has come along with me and has informed, sometimes frustratingly and sometimes joyfully, and always in a positive way, made me more of a human being. I will give you one story, and that is, it relates to Donna's idea of sexualization and how the medical community treats you and concludes that you can't have sex. We have two sets of twins who are IVF twins, but as we were getting older, my wife and I were interested in, doing what couples who are aging, want to do as the kids get older. And, hey, I said to my urologist, is there any technology out there? Because a lot of technology has changed, including IVF and wheelchair technology. A lot of things have changed positively for the disabled. Is there any technology out there that could help a couple who, want to go on some dates and have some wild weekends together? And my Israeli urologist said, John, yes, we do have some stuff. And he gave me this medication that's an injectable. And it allows for a complete and extraordinary cure for erectile dysfunction. And not something that people who have sensation down there might want to try, but since I don't, it's perfectly fine. I said to him, and this is a guy, as you can tell, Israeli, who said, yeah, John, here, I got something great for you. Go have a great time. So he's, sexually attuned, right? And I said to him, God, I tried it a couple of times, and I said, Dr. Barhama, do I need birth control? And he said, oh, John, don't worry. I look at your chart. You are a form of birth control. Don't worry about it. 3 weeks later, my wife had symptoms of something she didn't really understand, and we thought to ourselves, and we're looking at the calendar and going, wait a minute, could this be? And I said, because we're disabled parents, we have no idea what's been going on in the world. I said, I think you go to the drugstore and get these tests that will tell you. And she drove down to the drugstore. She came back. She ran upstairs, peed in a little cup, and she said, get up here! Our son Ajax is 7 years old. The apple of our eye. There are forms of medical malpractice that are worse than that, but certainly disability is no barrier to sex and family and the birth of children, and that's my story.
I just want to add one more. I want to add one more thing to that question about normalcy. And there's a scale of adjustment and acceptance of disability, and I think I got the acceptance down, but I'm always in the adjustment aspect.
That's
so that's
nice.
what I wanted to look.
That's beautiful. Please help me in thanking our 6 distinguished panelists.